The American political center is being destroyed. Not drifting, not evolving, destroyed. It is being squeezed out of both parties, pushed to the margins of both coalitions, treated as a betrayal by the activists who now set the agenda in each camp. Some people who hold the center are still in the parties. They are just no longer driving them. You can see it in how politics actually works now. Primaries that reward the most ideologically committed voters. Coalitions that punish deviation. Media ecosystems that monetize conflict over results. This is self-evident. But here's what doesn't get said. When I say the political center, I don't mean the midpoint between the parties. I mean the core. The weight-bearing tradition that holds this country together. It isn't a vague middle ground between two poles. It isn't a split-the-difference instinct or a preference for compromise. The labels we currently use for it don't actually describe it. Centrism is a position. It tells you where you stand relative to the parties. Moderate is a temperament. It tells you how to hold your views, not what they are. Independent is a negative. It tells you what someone isn't. None of those describe what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a tradition that's older than the current parties, older than the left-right axis, older than the ideological categories we use today. It has no formal name. It has never organized itself as a movement, but it built much of what actually works in this country. And right now, it's losing. This tradition operates on two things: a fixed anchor and a ruthless method. The anchor is the constitutional order, not a partisan reading of it, not a purity test or a loophole, the framework itself, the rule of law, representative government, and the traditions that have sustained it. This is our only political ideology. This is what stays fixed. The method is how you operate inside it. Within those bounds, there's no blind loyalty to a partisan package. No faction owns your vote. There are only problems and solutions. And the only question that matters is whether a solution actually works. Not whether it sounds good on paper, not whether it satisfies a grievance, not what works for the donors or the activists. Does it solve the problem in the real country with real people over the long term, without breaking the system itself? And yes, what works is contested. Reasonable people disagree. Governing is managing a collision of interests. Risk versus reward. Not everyone will be happy. That is not failure. That is the job. And here's the part that matters most. Almost everyone claims the anchor. Each faction wraps itself in the Constitution. That's the easy part. The hard part is the method. The hard part is watching a policy your own side built completely fail and having the courage to say so. The factions can't do that. Their identity is tied to the policy. So the policy can never be wrong. That is where we break from them. Not on the Constitution, on the willingness to tell the truth about what actually works. This isn't the only tradition that has mattered. Others have driven change and built movements. But this is the one that holds the structure together. And this is not a new philosophy. It runs through the best leaders this country has ever had. They never called it by any name because they didn't need to. In their eras, it was simply how serious people governed. Look at what it actually produced. Washington. He didn't stand above the fights of his era. He picked a side in the biggest one. Hamilton and Jefferson went to war over what kind of country this would be. A commercial republic with a strong federal government, or a loose confederation of agrarian states. Washington backed Hamilton. He signed the National Bank into law. He marched federal troops against the Whiskey Rebellion. History vindicated him. Hamilton's America is the one that got built, the one you live in. And yet, in his farewell address, he warned against faction, political division that would put themselves above the country. That's the move. He wasn't above the fight. He was in it. He made hard calls, and he was right. But he refused to let those calls harden into tribal loyalty. He picked Hamilton's policies because the country needed them, not because he owed a faction anything. Try to put Washington in a political box. You can't. He's not a centrist. He stood outside permanent party loyalty and warned us against it. He's not a moderate. He mobilized a federal army against an armed rebellion to enforce the rule of law. He's not an independent. That label is too weak for what he actually was. He was the architect, the one who set the pattern. Lincoln. Lincoln was the first Republican president, but he kept changing his positions. He defied the radicals in his own party at nearly every turn. Every change was driven by what the situation actually required and what was politically possible. He ran in 1860 promising not to interfere with slavery where it existed. A year into the war, he was telling his cabinet he'd free slaves in the rebel states by executive proclamation. By 1865, he was pushing the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery everywhere, permanently. That's not an ideologue. An ideologue walks in with the answer. Lincoln walked in with the Constitution and the problem of holding the country together, and he adjusted his methods as the facts changed. The anchor held. Defend the Constitution. Preserve the Union. Everything else was negotiable based on what would actually work. In 1864, in the middle of the war, he held a presidential election. He expected to lose. He knew his opponent would likely negotiate peace and let the Union permanently fall. But the Constitution demanded an election. Canceling it would have kept him in power and won the war on his terms. Holding it risked losing the Union entirely. He held it anyway. The anchor was not negotiable, not even to save the Union itself. That is a tradition under maximum pressure. Eisenhower. He got elected as a Republican, but ask yourself what his ideology actually was. He kept the New Deal in place, expanded Social Security, built the interstate highway system, the largest public works project in American history. He balanced the budget 3 times. He sent federal troops into Little Rock so black children could walk into school and warned the country about the military-industrial complex on his way out. Try to put that in a box. Liberal, conservative, centrist, none of those fit. What fits is a man looking at the country, asking what the Constitution allowed, what the problems actually were, and what would actually work. Then doing those things, regardless of which team's playbook they came from. 8 years of it, and it worked. That is the tradition. That is the real center, the structural one, the one that held. And that is exactly what is being destroyed. Not by accident, not by mysterious drift. It is being destroyed because for a generation, this way of governing has been told it has to pick a side. That it has to sign on to a party's full package or be treated as the enemy. Solving the problem isn't enough. The faction has to win. And the people who hold to it have mostly gone along. Passively. Coalition member by coalition member. Voter by voter. Telling themselves they haven't changed. They're just voting for whichever team seems slightly less destructive this time. But the team doesn't want them. Not really. The team wants ideologues. The team wants purity. The team treats the person who actually reads the policy, actually asks if it works, actually refuses to sign onto the parts that don't, as a traitor in waiting. And here's the deeper problem. This tradition has been losing because the political environment has turned against it. These forces are large and structural. Reversing them is a generational fight that will require serious champions and real reform. But it is also losing for a reason nobody wants to say out loud. The people who belong to this tradition aren't fighting. They're enduring, keeping their heads down, casting defensive votes, waiting for the fever to break. We've quietly accepted labels that let us stay passive. Centrist sounds like a spectator. Moderate sounds like someone who just wants quiet. Independent sounds like someone who has already walked away. This tradition isn't losing because it's outnumbered. It's losing because it's asleep. We have convinced ourselves that checking out is the same thing as taking the high road. When I started writing this, I thought the solution was to name it. I tried constitutional realism. It landed flat. I sat with it for a while, because this tradition does need a name. A political identity cannot mobilize without a handle. But I don't have the right one yet. What I know is that a name has to earn the weight of the thing it describes. The ones I've tried fall short. Finding that word is part of the work ahead. So for now, we describe it. It is the tradition of Washington, Lincoln, and Eisenhower. Men who weren't defined by the box they checked, but by what they built for the country, not the party. So here's the question. If you recognize yourself in this, if you are one of the millions of Americans whose politics live inside this tradition, what do you do? The first thing you do is wake up. Stop calling yourself a centrist when you're not in the center of anything. Stop calling yourself a moderate when your convictions are not moderate at all. Stop calling yourself an independent when that word is just an excuse to walk away. Those labels give us permission to do nothing. Because the partisans will simply keep writing us out of the story. They will keep telling us our tradition doesn't exist because it doesn't fit in their box. It exists. It is a lineage that runs from our founding through millions of Americans alive right now. And the second thing you do is step onto the field. When someone asks where you stand, stop offering them the weak language of surrender. Tell them you stand in a tradition older than the parties. Tell them you demand what works. Describe it if you have to. Force them to deal with the substance instead of dismissing you with a label. Because the thing failing us is not our numbers. There are millions of us, in both parties, in neither party, all over the country. The thing failing us is that we feed these structural forces with our silence. We've allowed ourselves to be scattered across coalitions that do not represent us, tagged with labels that give us permission to do nothing, told that our inheritance no longer exists. It exists. It is the oldest political tradition this country has, and it is time for it to assert itself.